All right. Welcome, listeners across time and space and the multiverse, wherever you may be. Let us have some more of our reading from Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice by James Branch Cabell, which was originally published in 1919. And we have arrived at chapter 26, In Time's Hourglass. Well, well, said Jurgen, when he had taken off all that foolish ironmongery and had made himself comfortable in his shirt. Well, beyond doubt, the situation is awkward. I was content enough in Conseil, and it is unfair that I should be thus ousted. Still, a sensible person will manage to be content anywhere. But whither, pray, am I expected to go? Into whatever land you may elect, my dear, said Aniatus fondly. That much at least I can manage for you, and the interpretation of your legend can be arranged afterward. But I grow tired of all the countries I have ever seen, dear Aniatus, and in my time I have visited nearly all the lands that are known to men. That too can be arranged, and you can go instead into one of the countries which are desired by men. Indeed, there are a number of such realms which no man has ever visited except in dreams, so that your choice is wide. But how am I to make a choice without having seen any of these countries? It is not fair to be expecting me to do anything of the sort. Why, I will show them to you, Anitus replied. The two of them then went together into a small blue chamber, the walls of which were ornamented with gold stars placed helter-skelter. The room was entirely empty save for an hourglass, near twice the height of a man. It is time's own glass, said Ananias, which was left in my keeping when time went to sleep. Aniatus opened a little door of carved crystal that was in the lower half of the hourglass, just above the fallen sands. With her fingertips, she touched the sand that was in time's hourglass, and in the sand she drew a triangle with equal sides. She who was strangely gifted and perverse. Then she drew just such another figure, so that the tip of it penetrated the first triangle. The sand began to smolder there, and vapors rose into the upper part of the hourglass, and Jurgen saw that all the sand in time's hourglass was kindled by a magic generated by the contact of these two triangles. And in the vapors a picture formed. I see a land of woods and rivers, Aniatus. A very old fellow, regally crowned, lies asleep under an ash tree, guarded by a watchman who has more arms and hands than Jixbayed. It is Atlantis you behold, and the sleeping of ancient time. Time to whom this glass belongs, while Beatrice watches. Time sleeps quite naked, Aniatus, and though it is a delicate matter to talk about, I notice he has met with a deplorable accident. So that time begets nothing any more, Jurgen. The while he brings about old happenings over and over and changes the name of what is ancient in order to persuade himself he has a new plaything. There is really no more tedious in wearing old dotard anywhere, I can assure you. But Atlantis is only the western province of Concierge. Now do you look again, Jurgen. Now I behold a flowering plain and 3 steep hills, with a castle upon each hill. There are woods wherein the foliage is crimson, shining birds with white bodies and purple heads feed upon the clusters of golden berries that grow everywhere. And people go about in green clothes, with gold chains about their necks, and with broad bands of gold upon their arms, and all these people have untroubled faces. That is Inis Loca, and to the south is Inis Dalib, and to the north Inis Erkandra, and there is sweet music to be listening to eternally, could we but hear the birds of Rhiannon. And there is the best of wine to drink, and their delight is common. For thither comes nothing hard nor rough, and no grief, nor any regret, nor sickness, nor age, nor death, for this is the land of women, a land of many-colored hospitality. Why then it is no different from Concierge, and into no realm where pleasure is endless will I ever venture again of my own free will, for I find that I do not enjoy pleasure. Then Aniatus showed him Ogygia and Typhime and Sudarsana and the Fortunate Islands and Aia and Saris and Invalis and the Hesperides and Meropis and Plancia and Uttara and Avalon and Tirnambiao and Thelema and a number of other lands to enter which men have desired. And Jurgen groaned. I am ashamed of my fellows, says he, for it appears their notion of felicity is to dwell eternally in a glorified brothel. I do not think that as a self-respecting young prince, I would care to inhabit any of these earthly paradises, for were there nothing else, I would always be looking for an invasion by the police. There remains then but one other realm, which I have not shown you, and in part because it is an obscure little place, and in part because for a reason that I have, I shall not assist you to go thither. Still, there is Luce, where Queen Helen rules, and Luce it is that you behold. But Luce seems like any other country in autumn, and appears to be reasonably free from the fantastic animals and overgrown flowers which made the other paradises look childish. Come now, there is an attractive simplicity about Luque. I might put up with Luque if the local bylaws allow for a rational amount of discomfort. Discomfort you would have full measure, for the heart of no man remains untroubled after he has once viewed Queen Helen and the beauty that is hers. It is for that reason, Jurgen, I shall not help you to go into Luque, for in Luque you would forget me, having seen Queen Helen. Why, what nonsense you are talking, my darling. I will wager she cannot hold a candle to you. See for yourself, said Ananias sadly. Now through the rolling vapors came confusedly a gleaming and a surging glitter of all the loveliest colors of heaven and earth, and these took order presently, and Jurgen saw before him in the hourglass that young Dorothy who was not Hateman Michael's wife, and long and wistfully he looked at her, and the blinding tears came to his eyes for no reason at all, and for the while he could not speak. Then Jurgen yawned and said, "But certainly this is not the Helen who was famed for beauty." "I can assure you that it is," said Ananias, "and that it is she who rules in Lucca. Whether I do not intend, you shall go." "Why, but, my darling, this is preposterous. The girl is nothing to look at twice, one way or the other. She is not actually ugly, I suppose, if one happens to admire that washed-out blonde type, as of course some people do. But to call her beautiful is out of reason, and that, I must protest, is simple justice." "Do you really think so?" says Ananias, brightening. "I most assuredly do. Why, you remember what Calpurnius Bassus says about all blondes." "No, I believe not. What did he say, dear?" "I would only spoil the splendid passage by quoting it inaccurately from memory. But he was quite right, and his opinion is mine in every particular. So, if that is the best Luque can offer, I heartily agree with you. I had been best go into some other country. I suppose you already have your eyes upon some minx or other." "Well, my love, those girls in the Hesperides were strikingly like you, with even more wonderful hair than yours. And the girl Ali, whom we saw in Chernambu, likewise resembled you remarkably, except that I thought she had the better figure. So I believe in either of those countries I could be content enough after a while, since apart from you I must," said Jurgen tenderly. "I intend to common fairness to myself to find a companion as like you as possible. You conceive I can pretend it is you at first, and then as I grow fonder of her for her own sake, you will gradually be put out of my mind without my incurring any intolerable anguish." Ananias was not pleased. "So You are already hankering after those hussies, and you think them better looking than I am? And you tell me so to my face? Oh, my darling, you cannot deny we have been married all of 3 whole months, and nobody can maintain an infatuation for any woman that long. In the teeth of having nothing refused him, infatuation is largely a matter of curiosity, and both of these emotions die when they are fed. Jurgen, said Anaitis with conviction, you are lying to me about something. I can see it in your eyes. There is no deceiving a woman's intuition. Yes, I was not speaking quite honestly when I pretended I had as lief go into the Hesperides as to Ternambo. It was wrong of me, and I ask your pardon. I thought that by affecting indifference I could manage you better, but you saw through me at once, and very rightly, because became angry. So I fling my cards upon the table. I no longer beat about the bushes or of equivocation. It is Ali, the daughter of Cormac, whom I love, and who can blame me? Did you ever in your life behold a more enticing figure? Anaitis. Certainly I never did. Besides, I noticed, but never mind about that. Still I could not help seeing them. And then such eyes, twin beacons that light my way to comfort for my most inconsiderable regret at losing you, my darling. Oh yes, assuredly, it is to Tirnamboo I elect to go. Whither you go, my fine fellow, is a matter in which I have the choice, not you. And you are going to Luque. My love, now do be reasonable. We both agreed that Luque was not a bit suitable. Why, were there nothing else in Luque, there are no attractive women. Have you no sense, except book sense? It is for that reason I am sending you to Luque. And thus speaking, Anatias set about a strong magic that hastened the coming of the equinox. In the midst of her charming, she wept a little, for she was fond of Jurgen. And Jurgen preserved a hurt and angry face as well as he could, for at the sight of Queen Helen, who was so like young Dorothy La Désirée, he had ceased to care for Queen Anaitis and her diverting ways, or to care for aught else in the world, save only Queen Helen, the delight of gods and men. But Jurgen had learned that Anaitis required management for her own good, as he put it, and in simple justice to the many admirable qualities which she possesses. Chapter 27. Vexatious Estate of Queen Helen. But how can I travel with the equinox, with a fictitious thing, with a mere convention? Jurgen had said. To demand any such proceeding of me is preposterous. Is it any more preposterous than to travel with an imaginary creature like a centaur? They had retorted. Why, Prince Jurgen, we wonder how you, who have done that perfectly unheard of thing, can have the effrontery to call anything else preposterous. Is there no reason at all in you? Why, conventions are respectable, and that is a deal more than can be said for a great many centaurs. Would you be throwing stones at respectability, Prince Jurgen? Why, we are unutterably astounded at your objection to any such well-known phenomenon as the equinox. And so on, and so on, and so on, said they. And in fine, they kept at him until Jurgen was too confused to argue, and his head was in a whirl, and one thing seemed as preposterous as another, and he ceased to notice any especial improbability to his traveling with the equinox, and so passed without any further protest or argument about it from Conseil to Luque. But he would not have been thus readily flustered had Jurgen not been thinking all the while of Queen Helen and of the beauty that was hers. So he inquired forthwith the way that one might quickliest come into the presence of Queen Helen. Why, you will find Queen Helen, he was told, in her palace at Pseudopolis. His informant was a hamadryad, whom Jurgen encountered upon the outskirts of a forest overlooking the city from the west, beyond broad sloping stretches of ripe corn. You see Pseudopolis as a city builded of gold and ivory, now all dazzling glitter under a hard-seeming sky that appeared unusually remote from earth. And is the queen as fair as people report? Asks Jurgen. Men say that she excels all other women, replied the hamadryad, as immeasurably as all we women perceive her husband to surpass all other men. But, oh, dear me, says Jurgen, although for one I see nothing remarkable in Queen Helen's looks, and I cannot but think that a woman who has been so much talked about ought to be more careful in the way she dresses. So this Queen Helen is already provided with a husband. Jurgen was displeased, but saw no reason to despair. Then Jurgen inquired as to the queen's husband, and learned that Achilles, the son of Peleus, was now wedded to Helen, the swan's daughter, and that these two ruled in Pseudopolis. For they report, said the hamadryad, that in Adia's dreary kingdom Achilles remembered her beauty, and by this memory was heartened to break the bonds of Adius. So did Achilles, king of men, and all his ancient comrades come forth resistlessly upon a second quest of this Helen, whom people call, and as I think with considerable exaggeration, the wonder of this world. Then the gods fulfilled the desire of Achilles, because, they said, the man who has once beheld Queen Helen will never any more reign contentment so long as his life lacks this wonder of the world. Personally, I would dislike to think that all men are so foolish. Men are not always rational, I grant you. But then, says Jurgen slyly, so many of their ancestresses are feminine. But an ancestress is always feminine. Nobody ever heard of a man being an ancestress. Men are ancestors. Why, whatever are you talking about? Well, we were speaking, I believe, of Queen Helen's marriage. To be sure we were, and I was telling you about the gods when you made that droll mistake about ancestors. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes, however, and foreigners are always apt to get words confused. I could see at once you were a foreigner. Yes, said Jurgen, but you were not telling me about myself, but about the gods. Why, you must know the aging gods desired tranquility, so we will give her to Achilles, they said, and then it may be this king of men will retain her so safely that his little fellows will despair and will cease to war for Helen, and so we shall not be bothered any longer by their ways and other foolishnesses. For this reason it was that the gods gave Helen to Achilles and sent the pair to reign in Leuce. Though for my part, concluded the Hamadryad, I shall never cease to wonder what he saw in her. No, not if I live to be 1,000. I must, says Jurgen, observe this monarch, Achilles, before the world is a day older. A king is all very well, of course, but no husband wears a crown so as to prevent the affixation of other headgear. And Jurgen went down into Pseudophilus, swaggering. Yeah. So in the evening, just after sunset, Jurgen returned to the Hamadryad. He walked now with the aid of the ashen staff which Thersites had given Jurgen, and Jurgen was mirthless and rather humble. I have observed your king Achilles, Jurgen says, and he is a better man than I. Queen Helen, as I confess with regret, is worthily mated. And what have you to say about her? Inquires the Hamadryad. Why, there is nothing more to say than that she is worthily mated, and fit to be the wife of Achilles. For once, poor Jurgen was really miserable. For I admire this man Achilles, I envy him, and I fear him, says Jurgen, and it is not fair that he should have been created my superior. But is not Queen Helen the loveliest of ladies that you have ever seen? As to that, says Jurgen, he led the Hamadryad to a forest pool hard by the oak tree in which she resided. The dusky water lay unruffled, a natural mirror. Look, said Jurgen, and he spoke with a downward waving of his staff. The silence gathered in the woods was wonderful. Here the air was sweet and pure, and the little wind, which went about the ilex boughs in search of night, was a tender and peaceful wind, because it knew that the all-healing night was close at hand. The Hamadryad replied, but I see only my own face. It is the answer to your question, nonetheless. Now do you tell me your name, my dear, so that I may know who in reality is the loveliest of all the ladies I have ever seen. The Hamadryad told him that her name was Chloris, and that she always looked a fright with her hair arranged as it was today, and that he was a strangely impudent fellow. So he in turn confessed to her he was King Jurgen of Eubonia, drawn from his remote kingdom by exaggerated reports as to the beauty of Queen Helen. Chloris agreed with him that rumor was in such matters invariably untrustworthy. This led to further talk as twilight deepened, and the while that a little by a little this pretty girl was converted into a warm, breathing shadow, hardly visible to the eye. The shadow of Jurgen departed from him, and he began to talk better and better. He had seen Queen Helen face to face, and other women now seemed unimportant. Whether or not he got into the graces of this Hamadryad did not greatly matter one way or the other, and in consequence Jurgen talked with such fluency, such apposite remarks, and such tenderness as astounded him. So he sat listening with delight to the seductive tongue of that monstrous clever fellow, Jurgen. For this plump, brown-haired, bright-eyed little creature, this Chloris, he was honestly sorry. Into this uneventful life of a Hamadryad, here in this uncultured forest, could not possibly have entered much pleasurable excitement, and it seemed only right to inject a little. Why, simply to injustice to her, Jurgen reflected. I must deal fairly. Now it grew darker and darker under the trees, and in the dark nobody can see what happens. There were only two voices that talked, with lengthy pauses, and they spoke gravely of unimportant trifles, like children at play together. And how does a king come thus to be traveling without any retinue, or even a sword about him? Why, I travel with a staff, my dear, as you perceive, and it suffices me. Certainly it is large enough in all conscience. Alas, young outlander, who call yourself a king, you carry the bludgeon of a highwayman, and I am afraid of it. My staff is a twig from Yggdrasil, the tree of universal life. Thersites gave it to me, and the sap that throbs therein arises from the Undar fountain, where the grave Norns make laws for men and fix their destinies. Thersites is a scoffer, and his gifts are mockery. I would have none of them. The two began to wrangle, not at all angrily, as to what Jurgen had best do with his prized staff. Do you take it away from me, at any rate, says Kellerus. So Jurgen hid his staff from Kellerus, where Kellerus could not possibly see it, and he drew the Hamadryad close to him, and he laughed contentedly. Oh, wretched king, cried Kellerus, I fear that you will be the death of me, and you have no right to oppress me in this way, for I am not your subject. Rather shall you be my queen, dear Kellerus, receiving all that I most prize. But you are too domineering, and I am afraid to be alone with you and your big staff. Ah, not without knowing what she talked about did my mother used to quote her Aeolic saying, the king is cruel and takes joy in bloodshed. Presently you will not be afraid of me, nor will you be afraid of my staff. Custom is all. For this likewise is an Aeolic saying, the time of the first olive is unpleasant, but the second is good. Now for a while was silent, save for the small, secretive rumors of the forest. One of the large green locusts which frequent the island of Luque began shrilling tentatively. Wow. Yes, read on. Wait now, King Jurgen, for surely I hear footsteps, and one comes to trouble us. It is a wind in the treetops, or perhaps it is a god who envies me. I pause for neither. Ah, but speak reverently of the gods, for is not love a god, and a jealous god that has wings with which to leave us? Then am I a god, for in my heart is love, and in every fiber of me is love, and from me now love emanates. But certainly I heard somebody approaching through the forest. Well, and do you not perceive I have withdrawn my staff from its hiding place. Ah, you have great faith in that staff of yours. I fear nobody when I brandish it. Another locust had answered the first one. Now the two insects were in full dispute, suffusing the warm darkness with their pertinacious whirrings. King of Eubonia, it is certainly true that what you told me about olives. Yes, for always love begets truthfulness. I pray it may beget between us utter truthfulness, and nothing else, King Jurgen. Not Jurgen, now, but love. Indeed, they tell that even so, in such deep darkness, love came to his sweetheart, Psyche. Then why do you complain because I piously emulate the gods and offer unto love the sincerest form of flattery? And Jurgen shook his staff at her. Ah, but you are strangely ready with your flattery. And love threatened Psyche with no such enormous staff. That is possible, for I am Jurgen, and I deal fairly with all women, and raise my staff against none save in the way of kindness. So they talked nonsense in utter darkness, while a locust and presently a score of locusts disputed obstinately. Now Kellerus and Jurgen were invisible even to each other as they talked under her oak tree. But before them the fields shone mistily under a gold-dusted dome. For this night seemed blinded of stars, and the white towers of Pseudopolis also could Jurgen see, as he laughed there and took his pleasure with Kellerus. He reflected that very probably Achilles and Helen were laughing thus, and were not dissimilarly occupied out yonder in the night of wonder. He sighed, but in a while Jurgen and the Hamadryad were speaking again, just as inconsequentially, and the locusts were whirring just as ostentiously. Later, the moon rose, and they all slept. Thank you for listening. That is some very, very complicated poetry there in Mr. Cabell's work. And I'm enjoying reading it. I hope you're enjoying listening to it. I hope you'll come back. These broadcasts are being archived on YouTube, Roarshock channel. Go there and subscribe. And other platforms, you can go to Twitter at Dr. Roarshock, DoctorRoarshock, at D.A. Wilson. That's at Haps. I'm not sure exactly where I will land, but probably all of those places. And also, apparently, these Periscope broadcasts will be archived even after Periscope is no longer live. Thanks for listening.